Ladies and gentlemen, I'm more than happy to be with you on this seminar. And I'm very thankful to all our Swedish and Finnish colleagues for this pleasure to be invited to speak about my country and Europe and relations between Russia and Europe. I'm very thankful to all organizers of our conference, and I really see how many people are interested in the relations between Russia and Europe. So I'm going to speak in Russian, because as you know, we are living in the world of internet. So my speech just now would be presented in Russia, and it's better to communicate with my fellow citizens in our native language and in Russian language, okay? I would try to be as slow as possible in order to be convenient for the interpreters. And you are certainly more than welcome to make questions, because I feel myself that I have the answers. Maybe you have questions. So we would start with this, okay? Уважаемые коллеги, дорогие друзья, спасибо за приглашение.
Dear friends, thank you for the invitation to speak in front of you. I've been sitting and thinking, why so many people here in the audience, really, who are so interested in the relationship between Russia and the EU, especially in countries like Scandinavian countries, in particular Finland. And I think that, first of all, it pertains to the fact that maybe we don't really comprehend it ourselves, but we think about the future. And in Europe, thinking about future without Russia is impossible. It has something to do with my presentation, Russia in 10 years, but first of all, in the beginning, I would like to take a general look at Russia and the entire world, and not necessarily in 10, but say in 30 or 40 years. But I think that in 40 years, in the world, there are going to be two economic centers, two centers of economic power, if you will. First of all, is going to be located in the USA, in the America, probably in the North America, and maybe in America in terms of together with Brazil and Latin America, or at least a few of South American countries. And the other center of economic power is going to be in the Asia. And we kind of understand where. It's China, Japan, Korea. And here we encounter a question. What is the destiny of Europe in this architecture? Where is Europe going to be located? Is Europe going to be able to compete, let's say, in 30 years from now, with North America, with Southeast Asia or Asia in general? And what is going to happen to Russia? What is going to be the stand of Russia in this architectural structure? What is the ability of Russia to find its function, its role, its place? The question is not rhetorical. It's a key question in the country, and it's a pity that what is happening now does not necessarily allow to seriously answer those questions. It seems that the answer is self-explanatory. What I'm telling you is based on the economic analysis, which has shown that only economic, political, and geopolitical, if you will, cultural, social integration of Europe and Russia can provide for competitiveness of this, if you will, this scope, this geographical scope of Europe and EU, and provide for a promising future. But there are a lot of obstacles in this path, and today these obstacles are much more substantial than the dreams about possible, prosperous, and beautiful future. And one of these obstacles, obviously, is the fact, which actually has become a fact, the economic crisis. Pay attention that it began in 2008, and it used to be called the financial crisis. Now, you know, in order not to scare people, it is called recession. But in reality, we're talking about the deep systemic crisis of the entire economy. And why? By the way, it's interesting that Astrid Thors has mentioned about it. She said that the trust is the most important element of modern development, and this is absolutely true. The economic crisis is a crisis of trust. It's a crisis of moral principles in the economy. It's a crisis of moral erosion in the economy. This is the crisis that we're talking about. It's going to take plenty of time before people begin to comprehend and really analyze it, because now we're still talking about nothing. Who has what kind of GDP and how these or those banks work. People are kinds of troikas and G7, G20 convene and speak without any kind of visible results. And this is a very serious thing. We're talking about the fact that the world economy, the economy of developed countries, has encountered a problem. Problems that will lead to re-evaluation of the entire economic model that has been forming for, let's say, last 30, 40 years. In reality, is going to be the most serious, the most deep re-evaluation of the economic system of capitalism in the nearest, let's say, 10 years. Without it, any movement forward is impossible. This is quite obvious by now. The second obstacle, which is expecting us, is the fact that all economic trends have shown that in 30 years, the gap between developed countries and those which are called now the developing countries or the third world countries is going to be so huge, so gigantic, that this gap is going to be unsurmountable. And if we talk about any kind of political correctness without reverences and flirting, and this can be done if you don't belong to any kind of a government. So we have to say that to cover this gap with any kind of a bridge is going to be impossible. From the point of view of education, for instance, from the point of view of the way of life, equality of life, from the point of view of modernization or innovation. In other words, the world is going to be divided very substantially into camps, and the animosity between those two camps is going to be quite a huge problem. That is going to be one of the most important key problems in, say, 30, 40 years. And we are going to need, well, this situation is not completely unsurmountable. There is a way out, but we are going to need some extraordinary political will to overcome it all. And with the political will in the modern political world, we see very large problems, as you can probably observe yourself. So we're going to have developed countries and undeveloped countries basically for good, forever, and that is going to be quite a problem. The third obstacle, which I can see as approaching us, which is in the way of creation of a large economic and political force of Europe and Russia, is, as strange as it is Russia, one of the obstacles. And the fourth obstacle, everything that is going on in Europe right now. So we have a lot of topics to discuss about, and there are a lot of obstacles in the way. But I would like to remind you in particular that when immediately after the Second World War, the idea emerged about creation of the European Union. The difficulties and obstacles were much more difficult, much larger, because the war had just passed, where European people were killing one another. Half of Europe was under Stalin, and nevertheless, brave, honest thinkers, European thinkers, set a goal, set a task which, back in the days, could seem completely idealistic and unrealistic, to create the European Union. And what do you know, 60 years later, that task was accomplished, and that was one of the most successful projects in the history of the Earth, which was consciously implemented, so that now we have economic problems. It is nothing in comparison with what has been done so far. Therefore, it is our obligation to set goals of a similar scale and see far in the future, look into the future, and try to find solutions of large-scale tasks. So I suggest to leave the economic development problems until the special encounter about this, maybe some kind of a conference. Would be really interesting to discuss these problems in Europe, and I think the time is going to come soon. But I think that today it's probably a better idea to concentrate on the problems related to immediately Russia and Europe. First of all, we should talk about what is going on with Russia and in Russia, and what are the projections for the future. Well, first of all, starting such a serious discussion, I would like to emphasize that Russian people in the 20th century did a completely unprecedented deed, an historical deed, historical step, if you will, if I can put in these words. We're talking about peaceful, voluntary, and to a large extent conscious exit from the communist system. There was no strategic scientific center in the world, no thinkers in the world, no futurists in the world who would say in 1985, for instance, that a large people, the Soviet people at the time, would consciously and voluntarily say goodbye to the communism. But nevertheless, it took place. It happened, and I think that that was the grandest event that could have been imagined in the 20th century. So the collapse of the Soviet Union is a completely different subject, a different topic. And I think that it is way more complicated than that. But when it comes to the Soviet or the communist system, the fact is undisputable that what happened, happened. And this awakens a lot of thoughts and leads to a very high degree of respect. But 20 years, more than 20 years, has elapsed, and what do we have now? Now, I would like to say, well, I can say very briefly that Russia is not a democratic country. And I don't know who is saying that it is, because nobody is saying that Russia is a democratic country. So telling you all those scary stories, it's not awfully interesting anymore. In the 90s, though, when in Russia all kinds of reforms took place under the guidance of Mr. Yeltsin, and all our Western colleagues and friends were completely beside themselves, and we would have liked to say that everything was going on the wrong way. But now all the newspapers in the world are writing that everything is wrong. They basically even over-exaggerating, so I don't know what to add. I'm going to tell you three most important things, though, which allow us to evaluate quite surely what's going on in Russia. They are very simple things, those three things. In Russia, there is no law which is equal for everybody, even the traffic regulations. Even the multiplication table is different for everyone, if you will. Everything is individualized. It depends on the president's opinion, what issue of the opinion. Secondly, in Russia is absolutely absent the division of power. There is no division of power at all. There's only one corporation. This is a corporation of civil servants which have its own interests, its own ethics, its own means of conduct, rules of conduct. There is no independent courts, independent judicial system, independent parliament. It is simply absent, and nobody is opposing this point of view. In the Constitution there is, obviously, but in the reality there isn't, and this is it, and everybody knows about it. So, respectively, I'm not going to speak about it in detail because, as you probably understand, it's not possible in the institutional conditions to conduct, for instance, free elections if you don't have any independent control organs or judicial system or legislation. How are we going to conduct the elections? It's quite impossible. So this is what it is. And if you don't have any independent financing, it means that you don't have any independent parties. So it's all quite simple. There's nothing extraordinary. And the third fundamental peculiarity is that there's no property rights. They are very conditional. For instance, the property rights, their conditionality in terms of the fact that they are completely dependent on the relationship between the owner and the authorities, not necessarily with the Kremlin. Of course, if we are talking about a large oil company, for instance, then the relations must be built in Kremlin. But we are talking about a large, for example, grocery store or a liquor store. You have to have a very good relation with the local authority in the street. If you don't have it, you are not going to have any beer or groceries. Somebody's going to have, but not you. This is how the system is constructed. This is how it was constructed in the 90s. The foundation of the system is the criminal privatization, which was conducted from 1993, 92 until like 98, let's say, in various forms, by collateralization, by vouchers, by all kinds of things. Back then, there was the hugest fraud since 1917, and on this foundation, this system was constructed where we live now, in Russia. I mean, this is the essence of the question. In these circumstances, it is difficult to assume that the development can have any kind of serious civilized moving forward. What in these conditions the government is up to? As a government/corporation, what kind of goals is pursuing any corporation? It's a self-preservation goal, first of all. To what extent? I heard a question when the new elections is going to be. To the extent that it can survive. It is not going to go away. For example, when Medvedev was president, he was asked, "What is your strategy?" One of the leading journalists asked that question. Well, first he apologized that he asked the question at a press conference. Medvedev said that our strategy is to keep the power, that's all. And then everything is going to be okay if you do that. So this is a quite open and comprehensible stand. So the leading instruments, the leading tools of corporations are, well, one of them is corruption. It means who is allowed, who is not, who is going to be punished, who is not going to be punished. And secondly, those who are allowed today may not be allowed tomorrow. So everybody must behave so that you are allowed today and tomorrow, and don't say an extra word. If you say something, you're going to be invited and say that, why are you involved in the corruption? You say that, well, everybody is involved in the corruption. It's okay for everybody, but it's not okay for you. So why is it happening like that with the former defense minister? Because he was the most powerful figure in the country. So it was a very good example to show, using his example, so everybody is scared. The most powerful businessman was using an example, and before that, one of the most powerful television channel was punished, and the old NTV was destroyed, and media stopped working. So the fear was so great that it was stopped cold turkey. So as soon as the business life realized that any large businessman can be incarcerated pretty much for good, so business is applauding to the president, and non-stop. Everybody is watching who first stopped applauding, So now we are going to sort it out with the civil servants, and this is the conversation with the defense ministry. We're talking about fines and law about foreign agents and all this absurd that we have already 200 parties. It all pertains to this block of self-preservation. These are the tools of this self-preservation. This is how it works, and this is how it's going to work. So now we are adding some steps towards the fact that, to speak like I speak here in front of you, it's not quite allowed either anymore. So we revised the law about treason, for example, and so in all the directions the system has created. It was understandable when there was inauguration of Mr. Putin, and we understood that these measures were going to be taken, because how are we going to lead the country if you cannot lead the law? Because there's no law. How to lead the country if there is no feedback, there is no civil organizations, NGOs, there's no any kind of desire to cooperate with the society. So only these tools are left, and these tools are being used. And in this connection, I would like to express, using this opportunity, that everything that I'm going to say is going to be published on the internet. My solidarity with the civil sector of Russia, with all the NGOs, and the idea of what is being done with them. They're being tortured. They're not being allowed to work properly. They're being pressured, suppressed, deprived from the possibility to, to maintain the feedback between the government and the society. And this is a very bad trend, very counterproductive. And I would like to express my solidarity with Golos, which with Mrs. Shabanova personally. And there is another thing which also deserves quite a serious discussion, is the deformation of the principle of the freedom of consciences, because the way how the relationship between the government and the church is being constructed is a very large deformation. This is the logic of the development, which is extremely dangerous, because the essence of this logic, as we call the sense of this logic, is in the fact that this is the construction of the relationship is like some kind of a game. It's not a win-win situation. It's a completely different story, It's either you or us. The entire relationship with the United States is constructed like a Nash theorem. You probably know what I mean. It's very well explained in his research. So how complicated this task is it from the point of view of Europe? For example, economic problems. From the point of view of the EU or European bureaucracy, European intellectuals, in Russia everything is not just good, it's just excellent. Really excellent, because the GDP growth is 3.6%. For example, what about Finland last year? 0.3%. 0.3. Okay, let alone Finland. Germany, 0.9. Not a lot. In France, it's impossible even to say, 0.1%. And in Russia, 3.6. Can you believe that? So everything is going on really excellently, wonderfully. From the point of view of the contents of the Russian economy, Russian economic development, the situation is not like this at all, because the efficiency of the economy is going down, the costs are going up, the production of the labor is 25% in comparison with the American reading, only 25%, like in Soviet times. The professional qualification structure of employment in Russia is quite dreadful. It's a very archaic thing, and this is not even the subject for discussion nowadays. And then the Vice Prime Minister is saying that 36 million people is working in grey economy. Maybe for Finland it's not a lot, but for Russia is a lot, because we only have 70 million people in the workforce. So it means that half of the people, half of the workforce is working outside of the official economy, and this is by the opinion of the government. In the opinion of the government, this is the real situation with the economy. But the problem is that no one in Europe can even speak about it, because this is not fashionable, if you know what I mean. Now the growth, GDP growth, inflation, trade balance, and things like that. That's what it all boils down to. And this is about today. What about the future? And now we have to talk about what I'm talking about, not about the GDP and growth and things like that. Now the internal policy, domestic policy. There are all formal necessary institutions which are present in the EU. The parliament, we call it Duma, even two chambers, the Federation Council, and we have senators, not chopped liver, senators, civil organizations, NGOs. How many raised do we have? 600 have been rated, and almost 1,000 organizations on any kind of issues. Parties, with the parties we have really, the party situation is excellent. We're going to have 200 parties very soon. So everything is going really well. The president comes to Europe and asks, what else do you need? In Russia we have absolutely everything you need. So actually, the fact that it's all just imitation, well, try to explain. Formally speaking, everything is there. It's a very deep question, in the real life, very serious question. But this kind of primitive dictatorship, if you will, that can characterize our political system. This is very primitive authority, which main problem is the fact that it does not provide for any kind of development. It does not give any self-respect to the following generation, self-realization, self-implementation. It doesn't allow people to live with dignity if you cannot vote properly, if you cannot voice your opinion, if you cannot unite on a political platform, like really. So this mechanism restricts the space of respect and human freedom to the extreme. And what is the compensation? How can you compensate the fact that all the mechanism is squeezing your personal space and embedded all with the fear? There's only one compensation, which is lie. And the problem of lie in Russia is more and more obvious. It has been existing for a long time. It's been a fundamental problem since 1917, but today it is becoming more and more obvious. And by the way, to overcome this condition and creation of democratic Russia and promotion of democratic Russia, there are a lot of signs, but only one sure sign that you can judge quite exactly how this moving forward is going on is overcoming the Stalinism, overcoming the Bolshevism, and the real exit from the Soviet system. This is promotion. This is a movement forward to democracy in Russia. Without that, everything is impossible, because YABLOKO considers its program, its platform, to combine everything and say that everything is together cannot lead to a positive result. Because to say that this is our united story. In 1917, we had a revolution, we had terror, and just 20 years ago, Russia gradually started to come out of that situation. We can also say a couple of words about the foreign policy. Foreign policy, what about foreign policy? Foreign policy of Russia is business. All the relationships with Europe is business. Excellent business, big business. So because business is very influential in many European countries, and for business, the business relationships are dominant, are the key. This is the determining factor of the foreign policy. And governments in Europe are very dependent on business sector, so they keep quiet about a lot of issues because of business, because of trade volumes, because of the scale. The scale is gigantic. $336 billion in 2012 of turnover, of trade turnover with the EU. With Germany, $100 billion. With Netherlands, $100 billion, the trade volume. So what do you want? What kind of discussions can we have? Business is the foundation because it changes everything. Otherwise, the relationships are very pragmatic, like, for example, with the US. You give some to us, we give some to you. But I think that hardly we have any kind of a serious possibility to ask questions what in these circumstances Europe can and what it cannot. What can it do? Take a look. Did you see who are interested in Russia? You probably saw a press conference of Russian President Mr. Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and the Russian President says that, speaking in front of an audience approximately like this today, that for the last 3 months, in 1 quarter, in Russian NGOs received $1 billion. Any economist or any person should be really surprised, because he first said it to the mass media, to the newspapers, and second time he said it at a press conference. And the chancellor is keeping quiet. This is a press conference. Say something. What are you talking about? $1 billion? $1 billion, where did it come from? $1 billion it's an impossible sum to imagine, but everybody's keeping quiet. Everything is fine. So what can you say? Quiet is quiet, so let's not pretend anything then. $1 billion cannot be explained by any means. There's some kind of a different problem. We don't know what kind of problem it is, because maybe the NGOs ended up with some, or include some other organizations, but you should kind of use common sense. For 3 months, $1 billion for the NGOs. We don't have NGOs that can even consume that much money, digest that much money. But this is a separate issue. This is just an example. Now I'd like to say a couple of words about some projections for the future concerning Russia. And the projections for the future are also quite serious, and I would like to attract your attention, dear colleagues, dear European colleagues. I think that it's not a secret to anyone that the USA is going to pull their armed forces from Afghanistan in the nearest future. So what do you think the things are going to be developing in the Central Asia? How is it going to be after that? What is going to happen to Uzbekistan, to all the region? Where it is going to go? Where it is going to end up? The speakers have spoken about migration, like in Europe, from one side to the other side and things like that. But when from Asia, from Afghanistan, from the Central Asia is going to move, so the movement is going to be only one-sided. There's no borders there, you know. There's no possibility to stop the flow, the migration flow. It's going to be a very serious issue. And if somebody thinks that European countries are very far away, they're not that far away. They're not as far away as you think. That's why I would like to tell you seriously that I see the signs, and the President of Russia understands it very well. In his communication with the American president, they take it into consideration. That's why we have military bases. We have a very interesting policy. We fight the adoption, but in the central Russia, in Ulyanovsk, we have American military base. Zyuganov couldn't even dream about it, but it is necessary because this problem has such a scale that otherwise you won't be able to solve it. Second threat is the economic recession of the EU, and in the US for that matter, because if in the nearest 2 years the European Union doesn't come out from the recession, for Russia it's going to be a very, very painful problem. Because unfortunately, the entire Russian business, the entire Russian economy is built on this attachment to the European Union, to the European market. This is the second very serious threat. And finally, there is our own internal problem, which is the collapse of the system, the disintegration of the system, because the system is built by the cooperation principle, which has been existing for the last over 12 years, so the signals don't go through. So, for example, the president makes a decision, and the decision doesn't go all the way down to the grassroots. The signal is distorted, and each level decides in its own way, and this kind of system is very fragile. And one push, and we don't even know what kind of push. It can be, I don't know, it can be just anything. But any kind of push, and this whole thing is going to crack. And this is the peculiarity of a corporation system. When the system is built on such things, in the system there are very large problematic elements like nationalism and corruption. This kind of a system is very, very unreliable and very shaky, and it's a very serious problem. So very often we hear questions like why Vladimir Putin has been in power for so long, why he's been elected, and actually he has been elected. So the answer is very simple. In any country in the world, if for 10 years the real income has grown up 3 to 4 times fold. 3 to 4 times fold. Any prime minister can retain his power forever. For Russia, it's unbelievable. Go to Siberia, go to Ural, see what Russian cities look like. It's a completely different picture. In principle, for 10 years, not in the lifetime of one generation, but 10 years, 10, 12 years, because everybody knows what it used to be like in the end of the 90s and what's going now, what it looks like now. This is one of the reasons why what's going on is going on. Why Democrats cannot win? Because they lost a lot. Those ones that were in power, they lost a lot in the 90s. I'm going to ask for a little more time, maybe 5 minutes. Russia is a small country. I'm going to be very, very quick, because I haven't said anything about Europe, and I would really like to, really feel like saying a couple of selected words. So the question is not that how long Putin is going to be in power, or not long, or whatever. The question in Russia is completely different. What is going to be instead of him? What is the alternative? This is the most important question. Maybe the only large political question. What is going to be instead of him? Russia already had some experience when the system is cracking the corners, and instead people come like Lenin and Bolsheviks. We cannot repeat a mistake like that. The questions of a formulation of the alternative, this question, how to form the alternative, is the most important issue in Russia, political issue. All other questions are secondary. This is the most important. This is the primary question. And our party believes that for us, it's the super important strategic and political task to form the alternative. Then we'll be able to speak about elections. We'll be able to speak about victories at the elections. We need to have some alternative figures, some alternative teams, alternative programs, open and clear program. This is what we are working on. But in these circumstances, under these conditions, it's a very difficult thing to do. But we are obligated to do it all by ourselves. Nobody's going to do it for us or instead of us. Because instead of us, no one can do it. This is our direct obligation and task. We see it as our most important goal. From the point of view of formulation of political agenda and direction, from the point of view of the electorate, well, I can tell you that there is no such a problem as a bad relation of the electorate to European lifestyle, for example. There's no such a problem as a rejection of Europe from Russia. We're talking about the people. The problem which exists in real life, which is a very deep problem, is that the people must believe that the change is possible. This is the problem. The first problem is to formulate the alternative, and second is to do it so that people really believe in this alternative. Maybe not even in this alternative, but believe in the fact that changes are possible. And on this road, it is very important what kind of policy Europe is exercising. Does Europe understand whom she's dealing with or he's dealing with? How long European politicians are going to do some unexpected things, like an example from old times. All of a sudden, General Lebed becomes the cult figure in Europe. Why? Because in Germany everything is very total. So in Germany it was a total admiration by General Lebed. Why? Because he's general and because he has a very low voice, very harsh voice. And Europe, all Europe is screaming, this is the future president. Before that, the same took place. It was a little bit different peculiarities. The first secretary of the Communist Party, Boris Yeltsin, so we're talking about political hierarchy, generals, business people. Now it's very interesting fashion. Those left-wing populist nationalists, chess players used to be, the very popular figures. I don't understand what's going on. Don't you have time to sit down and think and to analyze what is actually going on in reality? And when this situation becomes very vague, very unclear, unarticulate, it's very difficult to speak about it. And by the way, try to remember the year 2000. The person came from the security services, and everybody was in support. And our Democrats, not all of them, but a very large group of Democrats in the European people used to say that it's a very good thing. And all kinds of civil servants. If he used to be a prime minister, this is our guy, Europe says, because he used to be prime minister, and now he says that democracy is a good thing. So okay, he's our friend. So this is a very important issue. So the main issue. So, what is the most important thing out of what happens? And the most important that took place, because I need to finish an optimistic note. In 2011, 2012, what did those years show us? It showed us that in Russia there are a lot of people which are ready for change, which want the change. And it's a very important section of the society, a very large layer of the society. Not only those 150 or 200,000 people that came out in the streets. We're talking about millions of people that still didn't come out to the streets. They didn't take it to the street. We need to give them hope. We need to help them believe and create the alternative. This is if European Union understands Russia better and seriously understand Russian political problems, deeply analyze Russian personal problems, and less involve itself into the political correctness and more involved in the essence of issues, is going to be very beneficial to us. And another thing that we need is an example. We need the European Union to solve the problems, like in Hungary, for example, some small examples, in Greece, in Slovakia. Sort of other problems, but in France, problems with the gypsies, there are a lot of problems. Show us an example, show how you do it, and we will be extremely glad. That's why your success is extremely important to us. Make the success happen. We wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Да. Спасибо, Grigory Alexeyevich. We now have, I will take only a few questions, and then it's time for Kristina Ojuland. I think we will have lunch a bit later than planned, because I want to have time to give Mrs. Ojuland also her time. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Yavlinsky? Please.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to ask, what is the most valuable assets in Russia now?
In Russia now?
Yeah.
The answer is very simple. our people.
Real liberal.
Yes, please.
My question would be the following. I'm a representative of the D66 party in the Netherlands, Liberal Democratic Party. And I was involved as the head of the Human Rights Department in the EUMM, the European Union Monitoring Mission in Georgia. I was based in Grigory, birthplace of Stalin. And I was wondering, I don't know how familiar you are with the topic, but I'm wondering how do you see this involvement? European citizens, many Finnish colleagues I had there as well, working on border monitoring, peacekeeping at the border with South Ossetia, with Abkhazia, dealing a lot with Russian people. I'm thinking of the context that you mentioned of the US retreating from Afghanistan, and I'm also thinking of what Mr. I have to look up his name, Carl Haglund said this morning about European foreign security policy. What are your views?
My view is such that I think that if what you are doing there, and I have no doubts on that, is professional and honest, then it's very, very important. You know the disasters which happened without that. And you know what happens in Yugoslavia, when it was a special people, special troops there, and they were not prepared just to take part, to jump in the situation. So if the people are honest and they really see the problems with Abkhazia, because the problems there is very deep, it's not blah, blah, blah. You know what is the intentions of the people and what is the mood of the people in Abkhazia and Ossetia. It is not so simple as you can sometimes read in the newspapers. That's why it is very important, because it's a very important source of information. It's very important.
Do you think it can also work as an example, if we are doing well there in Russian, Georgian, European cooperation, that it can work as an example for this cooperation in other fields?
In any field. The question is to be honest and to be professional. More honesty, more professionalism. If money would come inside your business there, then you'll be in trouble immediately. The problem is that in all other kind of relations, money is there. Big money, big businesses is there. Because the number of Mercedeses in Moscow is much more than in Germany as a whole.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
We will have one more question, and then I will give the word to Ms. Kristina Ojuland. Please, there was...
My name is Niels Johan, coming from Copenhagen. I wonder, when you figure the problems from your point of view, that the climate issue could be one common issue we also have as a problem in the whole world. How do you discuss this problem in your country?
As you know, two things. As you know, the issue of climate and environment and ecology in general is the issue of the culture, of the level of the culture. It's point number one. Point number two, as you know, aggressive business don't care about ecology, don't care about environment and so on. And the problem in Russia is that the government in Russia is the business structure itself. The government making business themselves. So that's why they have no protective agencies. They have no protective structures. Because as it was the statement of the former Deputy Prime Minister, it's not the right time to work with the ecology. We need just now the growth of GDP. We don't care about all these things. So that is the problem. That's why we have no Ministry of Ecology. That's why we have no controlling structures. Simply, they do not exist. One of the goals of YABLOKO is we have a green faction inside the party, and for us it's extremely important to fight for that kind of goals.
I'm sorry, I will now cut the conversation short, although this was extremely interesting, because now it's time to welcome to the floor our next keynote speaker,